Good night, Belizeans at home and abroad. This is the Belizeans Affairs Show number 368. 368. We're happy that you decided to join us tonight to hear what we have to offer, and I hope what we have to offer becomes of some positive public benefit to those of you who spend your valuable time listening to our program. Again, I said this is the 368th program of the Belizean Affairs Show. My name is Leonard Brackett. Being Friday, I will be your chairman for tonight's program. And I'm running a few minutes late, so I'll just move on as effectively and positively as I can at this moment. I will go ahead and follow the same process that we do in our programming, which is to say a short prayer, after which we have another short reading. So I'll just go ahead and bow my head temporarily. Divine loving Father, once again we come before thy presence, asking that thou would continue to have mercy upon us. Please continue to bless us, guide us, strengthen us, give us wisdom, knowledge and understanding, endurance, perseverance, and a bit of fortitude to deal with the issues of this particular program, loving Father. We pray that thou must continue to bless our family members, friends, and loved ones wherever they are. Do knowest them by name and number, do knowest our hearts, our desires, even our most secret thoughts. Thou who art creator of heaven and earth, into thy hands we commend ourselves. Loving Father, we pray that thou mayest bless this program. Help that whatever we have to say tonight, may it be the right words. Please continue to guide and protect. Bless our country of Belize, its people and leadership. Please bless this country of the United States, its people and leadership as well. Thou knowest our trials and tribulations that we are undergoing. Please bless the rest of humanity, especially those people who are in harm's way and are being hurt, some of whom are being killed and losing their arms and limbs for no justifiable reason at times. We pray that thou mayest continue to abide with us now and always, for we ask these mercies in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you very much for bearing with us while we do the preliminaries of our show. And for tonight, I'll do a very short reading. I'll take the short reading from Proverbs chapter 17, and I'll read at verse 1. It reads as follows. Better is a dry morsel, that is to say, a piece of bread or food, and quietness therewith. That is to say, better we have a small piece of bread, food, or whatever we're going to consume, and with a little bit of quietness, than a house full of sacrifices with strife. That is to say, if you're poor and you have something to get by for the day, that's better than to have a whole household full of groceries and goods and whatever else, not to take care of your subsistence needs, and you're still having a home or a house of strife. That is basically where that text comes from. And it can be applicable in many different ways. For example, the topic of tonight, which we're going to deal with some, as the Friday night program usually does, we try to deal with some constitutional matters, specifically referring to the Constitution of Belize, some legal matters, law and case matters. And for tonight, we're going to indulge in the territorial integrity and the boundaries of Belize and the ICJ issues being dealt with currently. I'll try and put, in addition to comments on the ICJ issues, I'll try to contextualize some of those by making tonight another one of what we call a teachable moment. That is that we're going to refer to history as well. We're going to refer to quite a few cross sections of other disciplines, all of which needs to be brought to bear in order to understand the seriousness of this matter. So please bear with me. I'll be here, there, and everywhere. Some things you may have heard before, others you may not. Nevertheless, we have to contextualize all of it. We have to put something in a chronological order of time sequence. We also have to put some things in terms of uh, the issues of human migration through the rest of the world. That is to say, anthropology per se, which is another different discipline. So as I said before, we're going to be dealing with quite a wide cross sections of issues, all mostly pertaining to getting to the point as to whether or not Belize is justified in being a country situated where it's at with the integrity of its borders intact. Honduras is claiming part of Belize. Guatemala is claiming all of Belize. And we have two cases right now at the ICJ being dealt with. So I'll deal with the first part. That is to say, where we are today in relations to the issue of Belize and Honduras, which is the case currently being discussed uh, at the ICJ. Honduras does not necessarily have a leg to stand on in regards to their claims to the Sapodili Islands, a group of islands in Belize, in the most southern part of Belize, that's looking across the Bay of Honduras from Belize towards Honduras and from Honduras towards Belize. I will take up the Belize-Guatemala issue a little further on into the program, so just be advised of that. But the issue of Belize-Guatemala is a much bigger issue than the Belize-Honduras issue, which, as I stipulated earlier, the Belize-Honduras issue is mostly currently about the Sapodilla Islands. Whoever gets the acquiescence of the 15 judges sitting on this case at the ICJ in terms of a ruling favorably to whichever country, that country then will have the rights not only just to those islands per se, or legal and international under international law, a ruling in their favor for those islands, but they'll also have the rights to extend their maritime areas around those islands that will include additional oil, gas, and other minerals and assets below the sea, as well as the jurisdiction surrounding those islands. So everyone knows that oil or gas and precious minerals are usually contested by all people all over the world, all around the world, which is why we have what you call delimitation of boundaries according to a pre-established system under the maritime areas. And the United Nations, under the international law of the sea, as part of the purview of the ICJ, International Court of Justice, in regards to determining boundaries based either on treaties and or by legal clarification and establishment. In Belize's case, as regards to the first part of what I said I was going to deal with, which is the smallest part currently, which was spoken about yesterday and the day before at the International Court of Justice at the ICJ, the case were verbally, well, the documentation was presented and also the case was verbally heard and discussed, like I said, over the last few days. Each country put forward its best foot in terms of advocating for itself and the way they thought that it would benefit them in order for the court to rule in their favor. But there were some glaring omissions, oversights, and I would say deliberate sleight of hand as regards to what all three entities or three countries in this contest. Of course, the hearing today was, well, the most recent hearing was mostly about an application that Guatemala made to enter into a court case presently before the jurisdiction of the ICJ. Guatemala, Belize, and Honduras requested a hearing as regards to the Zapadillo Islands. And because it's within the same jurisdiction that Guatemala is trying to make claims of, they asked the court to allow them to also participate in this case because they have, according to them, because they make a claim, they are supposed to be granted the rights to have that claim established and or advocated on their behalf. And the result is that this hearing was being had. As I said, Guatemala already had a similar case with a much bigger issue against Belize, and which is why I said I was going to leave that for later on because it's much more substantive and it's not going to be finishing now, and it hasn't been, the documents have been submitted, but the pleadings have not been made fully in terms of the verbal presentations, which is yet to come. So I'll digress back to the Belize Honduras case as it's supposed to be. That is that Belize had its territory handed to it by the sovereign country of the United Kingdom, who used to control Belize as a crown colony. Why Belize became a crown colony was because Guatemala, for many decades now, basically 100 and almost 200 years plus, have been claiming that Belize belongs to them by inheritance. That is that they inherit Belize from Spain. Please bear in mind that specific statement that I just made, because we're going to come back to it with clarifications as to why is it that Guatemala makes that claim when in fact, in reality, that claim is bogus, and I'll point out to you how is it that Belize stands a very good chance at prevailing at the Hague, at the International Court of Justice in that particular regard. But I'm not taking that up, like I said, right now on the front end of this discussion because it's a long journey and it takes a lot of information and a lot of cross disciplines in order to make that presentation. So I just want to dispatch firstly with this smaller portion of the presentation in regards to Belize and Honduras. The British used to control Belize proper and additional territories beyond the borders of what presently constitute Belize. They had a portion of Melchor de Mencos district, Petén Flores district in Guatemala on the western side of Belize, and they gave that up as part of a treaty that was signed in 1859 to establish the boundaries that was favorable to Guatemala, because Guatemala did not want to lose additional territories based on the British taking more territories at that time, and or the filibusters, who they used to call the Yankee filibusters, them who had previously taken over Nicaragua. And Guatemala was fearful that some of those same people would come to Guatemala and take over Guatemala as well, or some portions of it. So they needed to enter into this agreement with the British, to make friends with the British, so the British could supply them with weapons and other assistance. So they were in a hurry to make that boundary treaty between Belize, formerly British Honduras, under the control of the British as a colony of the British Empire, or the British Kingdom. And the reason why we end up becoming a protectorate of the British, as a colony of the British, is because Belize was always being threatened by the Mexicans from Yucatan, basically at the time from Spain, and also from Guatemala. Because both of these entities, Guatemala under a different viceroyalty controlled by Spain, and Mexico under a different government, also controlled by Spain. They were contesting with the Belizean buccaneers and pirates and what they would call in those days the Bay people. And because Spain was a bigger and more powerful entity than the Bay people, and they would have conquered the Bay people had not the British rendered assistance to them, the Bay people then decided that they would, in the interest of staying stable and keeping that territory under their control, that they would make a deal with the British to provide them protection. And over a period of time, that promise for protection went from just an assistance to some British entities that used to be cutting logwood and other things from Belize, into a full-blown you call it a full-blown relationship with Britain, where Britain eventually ended up with Belize as a colony of Britain. And when that treaty was made between Belize and Guatemala, there was also a treaty made between Honduras and the British. Of course, Honduras at that time was still, like I said earlier, under what you'd call a viceroyalty. It was not independent as an independent country, the Honduras that we now know today. It was part of the Central American Confederation, under the Central American Viceroyalty, headed by Guatemala. And they had their problems among themselves. At one point, they declared independence. But before they declared independence, long before that declaration of independence in 1821 by the Central American republics, including Guatemala and Honduras, that we're currently referring to, the British had some territories in Nicaragua, where Nicaragua and Honduras is joined on the Atlantic. Well, more properly stated, in the Caribbean, on the Caribbean side, they had what you call the Mesquite indigenous people, besides the Mesquite indigenous people, you had some people from the Carib community. And you also had people from Jamaica. You had people from Britain, because they had what you call, back in those days, the Black River Settlement, and quite a few other settlements, as a matter of fact, because the British was trying to conquer Central America themselves. But between Britain and Spain, after they had one of these meetings that they call the Treaties of Versailles, Versailles being a castle and a prominent place of diplomatic undertakings during the many wars that the Europeans they had among themselves. This one was in France. They got together in France and they were discussing how they were going to cease and desist the warfare. So they came up with a treaty. And like I said, not only that one particular treaty, but many other treaties occurred during that same dispensational time. A few decades in between. They were fighting and then stopping and making treaties, fighting, then stopping and making additional treaties, fighting and so at one point, the British were asked to give up control over blue fields and the Black River settlements and remove themselves from Central America proper as part of the treaty, and that they could then take some of those people who used to be friendly to the British and working with the British while they were trying to do their conquest. The British were asked to give up those territories, and then they also had to give up Vanaka, Raton, and all those other islands that was immediately in front of Honduras. So they gave up those things in lieu of having Belize city and the country of Belize, which was then at that time just you'd call it a BMN outpost or a BMN colony. And they brought some of those people from Raton and Vanaka and Bluefields and the Black River settlements. Some of them went to Jamaica, some went to Belize. And as a result, then Honduras and Nicaragua was then left to be colonized mostly by the Spanish or the Spaniards, so to speak, or under their control. Of course, they still had indigenous people living there in those two countries. The bottom line is that while the British gave up certain parts of territories, they were allowed by the Spaniards to continue expanding in certain areas as regards to Belize. The Bay people were all the way over the Sarstoon River into Guatemala proper, into Livingston, and also into Puerto Barrios. As a matter of fact, Puerto Barrios does not actually belong to Guatemala. It's part of the rented territory that they rented from Honduras for 100 years and has refused to give back those territories to the Honduranians. So therefore, there's a part of Guatemala at that area there that properly belongs to Honduras. But Guatemala is trying to hold on to that territory and at the same time trying to claim all the waterway, the sea in front of that particular section of the landmass as their own. Why? Because they're refusing to give back to Honduras what belongs to Honduras, and Honduras should have the rights to make that claim for all the land mass at that point, as well as the water, the sea in front of that particular section under international law. But none of those portions of land comes into the area that properly belongs to Belize, or that Belize is authorized based on past treaties to have control of. And Guatemala and Honduras are both saying that the treaties that Belize have does not include that particular group of islands as known by the Sapadilli Islands. And that's what the beef is right now presented before the court, the International Court of Justice, to clarify that matter. Now, based on history, there's no way that Belize should not retain those islands. Because what Guatemala and Honduras is doing is making a claim, a bogus claim, that because Spain was authorized by the Pope to take over the whole of Central America and North America, that then they have a right to inherit what Spain was authorized by the Pope to take, they can take for themselves. That is Guatemala's claim. That is Honduras' claim. But Honduras is failing to remember that before they became independent, there were other treaties made between Britain and Spain as regards to Ratan Island, Vanaca Island, the Blue Fields area between Nicaragua and Honduras, as well as the Black River settlements area. And part of that Black River settlements had gone deep down into the Black River itself in the Nicaragua, Honduras peninsula, well, not peninsula, you call it a bulge proper. And they are failing to acknowledge those realities or those circumstances and are trying to come with a bogus scenario where they're claiming that, in particular regards to Honduras, as I said, I'm trying to dispose of that particular claim, or at least bring up some of the relevant historical and information that shows their deficiency in their case. That is to say, they are trying to claim that their territorial waters goes far out enough from their landmass, I'm referring to Honduras, into the Caribbean Sea itself, especially as particularly relating to the Bay of Honduras, between Honduras, the Republic, and Honduras, British Honduras, because back in those days when those treaties and discussions was being had, Guatemala had no outlet to the Atlantic. It had no outlet to the Honduras Bay itself, which is another issue that came up in 2000 with the rank-file WICA proposals to give Guatemala access to the Bay of Honduras, so they can get out into the Caribbean and get out properly to the Atlantic Ocean. And those are other issues under the Maritime Areas Act that Belize had tried to implement at one point under international law requirements. But Honduras territory cannot and should not be able to expand to where they can claim something that they never had possession before. They never had possession of the Sapadilla Islands. It was always under the British control. Britain never ceded those islands. Britain has a sovereign power and authority on those islands and control of those islands, passed those islands onto Belize, just like how Honduras is trying to claim that the islands and the whole of Belize and everything else had belonged to Spain, and whatever part of that territory they were able to take on by their declaration of independence that they're entitled to. They're also trying to deny the fact that Britain had control of those islands. Belize inherited those islands as part of its independent territorial boundaries, and still, as of today date, still controls those islands. What's happening is that because those islands, like I said in the beginning of my presentation, whoever controls those islands controls the sea around it, and are able to demand or control additional um, uh, claims to economic zones and everything else that is under the sea adjacent to those islands. And that is what's causing the problem, because everybody knows that those islands are sitting in an area where there is gas and oil, and everybody is rushing to try and get the gas and oil as well as the whatever else is under the under the seabed. Other than that, for all these decades and decades and hundreds of years, Honduras never incited or excited any claim to those islands and or to any part of Belize. As a matter of fact, the relationship between Belize, British Honduras, formerly, and the Spanish Republic of Honduras, currently, had always been one of amicable coexistence, live and let live. But because Guatemala wants to take the attitude that they have part of Honduras, and therefore, in their suit against Belize, they are claiming part of what naturally should have belonged to Honduras as being theirs, when in fact they are making a bogus claim. They have no grounds to stand on. But as regards to the Honduras matter, Honduras is now claiming that they depend on one of the documents that Guatemala submitted in its formal claim to Belize, a document that was relating to 1835. It's dated for 1835. I think it's August. I don't remember if it's August 11th, but it's in August of 1835. That Honduras is now claiming that they are depending on that document that Guatemala submitted to the ICJ in the Guatemala Belize claims for their proof to show that they deserve to inherit the Zapadilla Islands and all the extra territorial and sea bed around those islands and under those islands, and all the minerals and everything else that goes with it. They're just now coming to that realization, in 1981 when Belize became independent. They decided to file a claim to try and see if they can get those islands from Belize. Why? Because when Belize became independent, as a small little entity in that area compared to the size of Honduras or Guatemala, that Belize was then ripe for the taking by any of these other two bigger countries. That they could make any kind of claim and force their claim on Belize, because Belize was then independent and would not have the British or any other entity to protect them. Well, history has proven otherwise. Was it not for the treacherous, malignant governance people that we had dealing with our governance from our independence till today date, we should not have found ourselves at the ICJ either under the Guatemalan claim and or under the Honduras claim. Now, of course, let's remember, it was Belize, in this particular Belize, Honduras claim, it was Belize that initiated the Honduras involvement at the ICJ, because Belize, or so-called smart head leaders and knucklehead lawyers, had this impression that if the court could rule on behalf of Belize by some sympathy vote, then we will be in good stead, rather than dealing with the facts and the documentations the way they are, and having the United Nations accepted Belize as an independent country by almost 99% of its membership, that Belize should have been able to rely on the United Nations territorial integrity guarantee for our independence. Not only that, Belize was a member of the Commonwealth, still is. Belize was a member of the non-aligned countries, still is. Belize is a member of CARICOM, still is. You know, and Belize is a member of Central America group of countries because of its geographical location, and still is. As well as Belize is a member of the Organization of American States, and still is. So no way should we have ended up at the ICJ questioning and or having anybody contesting the legality, validity, or the rights of our country to have its territorial integrity intact. But for the failure, as I stipulated a little earlier, of people who apparently were not working on behalf of Belize, but rather on behalf of foreign agents. So, as regards to the Honduras case, which I said I wanted to wrap up or at least comment on first, I'd like to wrap up my comment by saying, while Honduras may have a chance at being successful at their claim for the Zapadilla Island, that is to say, because they're saying that Spain did not give up the Spanish claim to British Honduras. So therefore, when they took their independence, when Honduras took its independence in 1821, which was long before 1834, is it 34 or 32? I think it's 32. I'm not bringing that number correctly right now. It's somewhere between 1832 and 1834. I think I mentioned about it earlier, but I'm kind of babbling now for the correct date. But nevertheless, at that time, Spain did not recognize the independence of the Central American countries, especially as particular to Guatemala, until 40 odd years after they declared their independence. They declared their independence in 1821, and Spain did not recognize them until 1864, 63, 64, somewhere around there. I can't recall the date specifically either. But it was like 41, 42 years difference. So how the devils could they claim that they inherit what Spain had when Spain had not even recognized their independence for 40 years later? Spain could not give to them what Spain had already negotiated with the British, and which the British had control of. Spain could not yield to Guatemala nor to Honduras. But Honduras is saying they have a claim on that, or rights as the inheritors of Spain's territory in that area, for them to extend their territory all the way to the Zapadillas. Well, it's in the jurisdiction of the ICJ court, and it's going to be resolved at some point in that regards. But I'm saying we should not have had to be there, but for bad management on our part. I want to go on to the Guatemalan issue, for example. The Belize Guatemala issue stems from the fact that, as I said earlier, Spain was authorized by the Pope or the papacy to take one half of America, and Portugal was to take the other half. Why? Because according to the ignorant Europeans, Columbus discovered America. Of course, that's in their ignorance, they acknowledged that and propagated that for literally hundreds of years. In other words, they sold a bunch of goods that wasn't what they sold under false pretext and false claims. The Pope had no authority to give what they claim that they had discovered to two entities in Europe, but it was done. Was it illegal? Was it moral? Was it ethical? all under the guise of religious conversion of these people that existed in the era that they had discovered. How can you discover something that somebody else own, control, and is living on? The Americas was populated for thousands of years before the Europeans so-called discovered it or discovered that it existed. Why? They were ignorant of the fact of geopolitics and geography. They were ignorant of anthropology. They were ignorant of a whole lot of different things that only today they are becoming aware of, gaining a better understanding of, and realizing that what they sold for hundreds of years doesn't jive anymore. People are a lot more sophisticated and wiser and understand better, and they need to change their ways. But these conquistadors' offsprings refuse to change their ways. That is that their forefather, according to them, have a decree issued to them to say that they have control over these territories and the people that were living there or that owned it. And they're trying to enforce that on our modern societies. That is to say, because the Pope decreed it as such back in those days, to their date, it ought to prevail and be the same. The same children of the conquistadors in Guatemala, for example, the people that you call the Castellanos, who run and control the affairs of Guatemala, who are children from the Spanish kingdom of Castile, whose queen used to be Isabel of Castile. They're the ones that are now laying claims to say, because their forefather went to Guatemala and conquered Guatemala, everything that belonged to Spain or Spain lay claims to by murdering and raping and pillaging those people that they found owning those properties that had been living there for hundreds or maybe thousands of years. After they discovered that they existed in this world, that they had the right and the might to go and dispossess them of whatever is it that they had. And after so many hundreds of years now, the new generations are still persisting with that same mindset and mentality. They want to control the indigenous population of Guatemala. They killed hundreds of thousands of them the other day just in order to take away lands from them to sell to the European people then. It's the same craziness that happened and has been happening for hundreds of years. They're still trying to carry on to their date. Especially as regards to the claim that they say they have over Belize. They're pretending and trying to teach the modern generations that they did not sign any treaty with the British on behalf of Belize. They're claiming that those treaty was null and void because, for example, part of the treaty under what you call Section 7 of the treaty, Article 7, which was a promise to help build a cart road, not a highway road like they have currently, because for all intents and purposes, Article 7 of that treaty has been superseded not only by a cart road, but by highways running from Guatemala to Benque. I mean, well, not Benque proper, Guatemala to Melchor. And highway from Melchor or Benque Viejo del Carmen in Belize, all the way to the sea. And they have been doing commerce with us, which is what that cart road was intended for. They have been doing commerce with Belize to the point where they get 95% of the profit in the commercial endeavors between Guatemala and Belize get 5% because Belize is smaller. Make that make sense. And they're claiming that because the British didn't build the cart road that was promised, even though the British have helped them economically to become economically stable and has helped them in many ways commercially, that they're trying to lay claim to Belize and tell the now modern Belizeans that we don't have no right to be in Belize because that territory belongs to them, because they gave us that territory in exchange for a cart road. Who is so stupid and so ignoramus to believe that kind of crap in today's modern society, where you would have given up a half of a country just to have that country build a cart road to give you access to that country? Explain that to me, somebody. Because I know the Guatemalans can't explain it to me. I know enough about the history, pre-Columbian and current history. I know that long before the Mayans came to Guatemala and conquered the people that were in Guatemala, that there was what you call the Mesoamerican people, the Olmecs, who controlled the whole of Central America and the Mesoamerica sections of Central America, Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Panama, and Costa Rica. So they can't bamboozle me with that kind of nonsense there. And I know the anthropological history of how this part of the world became populated. And thousands of years before the Mayans, there were the Olmecs that had conquered Mesoamerica. So the Mayans are not the indigenous people of Central America. They are classified as such because they have been living there for literally over 1,000 years. But they were not the original conquerors or original people that lived in that area. So if they don't have a full claim as to say, well, because they were there before somebody else, that means that the other people that came after them have no right to be there either. Because they have no right to be there either by virtue of them having displaced other people. That's the wider picture based on anthropology. Okay? But let's come back to modern circumstance as regards to the Guatemalan claim on Belize. The Guatemalans, they needed help. Like I said, when the filibusters had taken over Nicaragua, and the Guatemalans thought that they were next, they wanted to have the British assist them. So they entered into a legitimate treaty with the British to have the British stay within the existing current boundaries that we now know of Belize, to be the boundaries beyond which the British would not go. So the British stepped back from where they were, came back across the Sarstoon River towards Belize side, and the Sarstoon River became the delimited boundary line as a natural river body of water that could be monitored easily. But on the western side, and that is the southern side of Belize, between Belize and Guatemala. But on the western side, they agreed to survey, and they actually went ahead and surveyed and put up post markers that assisted in the delimitation of those boundaries. Then subsequent to that, they went back and they did another, I think it's 2 kilometers wide on both sides of that border as an adjacency zone in order to forbid the people from one side to the other from entering into that adjacency zone and use it to try and violate what was considered to be a zone of a peace zone. Okay? And the reason why is because some people from Guatemala was migrating into Belize in droves, setting up their own little villages, and when the Belizeans asked them to leave, they refused. And the Central and the Latin American um, uh, Organization of American States had to get involved, and they, from back then until now, are still monitoring that border um, line, the adjacency zone, they call it. But the, that was like taking away 2 kilometers along the full length of that border away from Belize. While they allow their people from the Guatemalan side to go and live into that area. And not only into that area, but they are now currently living into the Chiquibul area of Belize and many other parts of Belize and deforesting those parts of Belize and taking out all the woods and everything else, you know. So now we are at the ICJ under a bogus claim that Guatemala is claiming a little bit more than half of Belize. And they have no such rights to make any such claim because they cannot claim that they inherit what belonged to Spain and what Spain owned. The title that Spain had to declare ownership of those property was a bogus title to start with. It's a favored title that was given to them on a false pretext. The authority that was used to vest those properties in the Spanish kingdom was not legitimate. It was a usurpation, a stealing, a declaration that had no true merit unto itself, other than for the fact that powerful people back in those days were behind it. But power doesn't make right. I don't care how much power you have. You cannot, within the human existence, use power alone to disenfranchise other people of their own property or their own goods or what doesn't belong to you. Not because you have power, you go and steal it or take it away from somebody else. That's improper. That's illegal. That's immoral. That's unethical. And that is part of the problem that has been causing all these wars. Not only just recently, for aeons, for decades, for hundreds of years, for millennia, as a matter of fact. And I'll go as far back as saying it's the same problem that caused what the Bible described with Adam and Eve and their offspring, Cain and Abel. That Cain killed his one brother, Abel, for material goods. And it has never stopped from then till today date. All the killing and murderation going on is because of trying to take away somebody else's property. Throughout history, it has never stopped. And today we have a situation where we, the Belizeans, are at the Hague over what we consider to be our material possession and our rights, and other people are trying to classify as their material possession and their rights. And they are trying to stop us right now at the Sarstoon River from being able to navigate our part of the Sarstoon River that they had declared in their treaty with the British to be the way things are to work out. Now they are coming with a different cock and bull story with revisionist history, trying to pretend that we, the modern Belizeans, aren't supposed to be aware or know enough about our own history and the history of any foreign affairs that relates to our neighbors. So they want to bamboozle us, and some of our own leaders are participating in that process to get us to the ICJ, hoodwinking the people, changing our laws, and making agreements with Guatemala to give them stick to break over our heads, such as the special agreements and others. Belizeans at home and abroad, tonight's program is intended to focus on what's going on at the ICJ. And what we know going on at the ICJ, we heard Mr. Ben Jerotowicz's presentation on our behalf, which, as far as I'm concerned, was well presented, even though there's still some bits and pieces that was overlooked. As I said, there's some omissions and oversights. Of course, in the presentations that was made or that we are privy to, that is broadcast, we have not seen, nor I'm not aware of all of what was presented, because there was the verbal presentation as well as the written presentation. But so far, from what I can see, there's omissions, oversights, and some errors. And if those are presented or have been presented before, then I hope that would be the case. Because if it's not the case, then we're coming up a little short. But the presentation, I would say, was much better than what most people would have expected. And as for the Prime Minister, who had said that Mr. Ben Jerasovic did not understood his assignment in a particular case as regards to Portico, the sordid, I would call it, affair of Portico, that dastardly statement was made by our Prime Minister against Mr. Jerasovic, because Mr. Jerasovic chose to tell him the truth rather than tell him what he wanted to hear, in order for him to use that what he wanted to hear to lie to the Belizean people and take chance of the Belizean people. Because he wanted that other idea bantered around so they could have run ahead and used the powers vested in them as the governing agents on behalf of the Belizean people to rip off the Belizean people. Because that's what the Portico affair was about. We will not get into it tonight because we have dealt with it quite a few times in the past, to the point where, as of right now, if the Portico agreement is still alive, it's alive on its deathbed. And not to say that we wouldn't go back to it and deal with it some more in the future, because until we are guaranteed that it's buried, and even after it's buried, that it can't be dig up and resurrected, we need to stay engaged, be aware, and make sure that we don't get hoodwinked. But let me go back to the Belize Guatemala issue again. We still have a few minutes left on the program, and I want to dedicate that to the Belize Guatemala affair. Guatemala was part originally of the Kingdom of Spain under the Mexican authority. It was Hernan Cortes himself who had to go to Guatemala after sending military expeditions to Guatemala and Honduras. He had to take up troops from Mexico and go down to Guatemala and Honduras to discipline his own subordinates that he had sent down there to take care of those places. Why? Because from way back then, there was a collusion by some of the Castellanos then to undermine Hernan Cortes' authority over those lands, as was stipulated by the authority granted to him, to go and conquer Central and North America on behalf of the Spanish Empire, or the Spanish Kingdom at the time, under Ferdinand the Great and Isabel of Castile. They were the one that authorized Columbus's trip that was supposed to have been a trip to China, to go to find a new route to China for them to be able to do trade. Now, the ship that they used to go and do that trade when they went the first time and ended up in Latin America, they had nothing on that particular ship that they could have done any trade with the Indians, with the Arabs, the Indians, or the Chinese, who at that time was also advanced. And the little piece of glass and other stuff that they had on that ship could not have served them any trading advantages had they succeeded in going around the Horn of Africa. Well, not the Horn of Africa, the southern tip of Africa, and then ending up in the Indian Ocean and then to China proper. Because that's what, according to them, they were trying to do with navigating on that first Columbus ship, which Columbus was lying to them about and had known that there were other people who had gone to Latin America and came back, and he had gotten that information in the Canary Islands from some of his friends who had documentations about those ships. And when Columbus got at the right place on his journey going down to Africa, he didn't go straight down to go around the end of Africa, which meant that he would have been going south and then east. He changed his southern trajectory at one point and turned west, which is 180 degrees different than where he was supposed to be intending to go or ending up. He was supposed to end up in China, and he ended up in the Americas. He didn't even tell the queen or the king that that's what he was after. He didn't tell his troops, the people that was on his voyage with him, his colleagues, that that's what he was after. He was in the middle of the Atlantic, coming across the Atlantic, facing all kind of storm, and refused to tell them what he was really after or trying to do. Why? Because he feared that they would mutiny, and he would have become a casualty of that mutiny. So it was only after he saw land that he decided to tell them that they had found land, and it was new land that they had known nothing about in terms of the European concept or historical point of reference. And then he claimed to have discovered what he actually found to have been true based on the evidence that was provided to him before he started his journey. Because when he got to the Americas, he found people that had come across those same treacherous waters thousands of years before him. They were all black people from Africa. The Tainos, the Red Caribs, the Black Caribs, and the Red Caribs were a mixture of the Black Caribs and the other Mesoamerican indigenous people who used to ply the waters of the Caribbean, trading back and forward, and also on the main Central American and part of the South American continent, as well as part of the North American continent. Long before Columbus ever came to America, Europeans knew about America. Does anybody remember Genseric the Red, the Viking, who came to North America and who set up posts in North America, who traveled all the way down to Florida? Check your history. Columbus did not discover America. Columbus confirmed the existence of America. And he confirmed it to the ignorant ones in Europe who never knew or understood anything about navigation, anthropology, and or about other people. But when he came and found what he had been told to have been so, he also found out that the people they had wealth. And he also found out that the people were less militarized than they, the Europeans, were at that time, because they were fighting among themselves and others against the Arabs and others. So he figured that they could bring more troops over this side of the Americas and vanquish these people and take away, rape and pillage and destroy what was to create what they wanted on their own behalf. And they have never stopped taking away the wealth of the Americas from way back then, the first time they came, until today date that we are having this conversation on this platform. How most of the European countries are highly invested in the Americas in terms of commerce and other activities. As a matter of fact, anybody remember the Monroe Doctrine? Does anybody understand what the Monroe Doctrine was supposed to have been all about? It's not a question that is being asked irrelevantly. Does anybody remember what manifest destiny is all about? Manifest destiny is not just about the 12, about conquering 12 states on the Americas, and then turning those 12 states eventually over time into 50 states, and other overseas territories or lands or assets. Manifest destiny is the power of the powerful to take from the weak and control what belongs to the weak under the guise or the aegis of the powerful, whether that be a European power, an American power, whether it be a Russian power, whether it be a Chinese power, whether it be an Australian power. In Australia, you have Europeans who went there, who was actually sent there and put there as prisoners. They were vanquished from society and put there as prisoners, who took over the whole of that continent from the indigenous people by military means, and who have them now subjugated under what you call manifest destiny theory. They happen to have been put there. They happen to have a more militaristic and bellicose mindset. So therefore, they just take everything over by brute force and vanquish those who had existed there for thousands of years. Same thing happened in America, in South America, Central America, North America. But let's get back to Belize, which is where we really are trying to deal with this matter that is before the court. The Guatemalans are making false claims against Belize because they want the land and the assets that comes with that land of Belize. They want it for themselves. And if they could have killed over 300,000 of their own indigenous people, what do you think they wouldn't do to Belize and Belizeans if they were put in a situation where they have to march on Belize, being a much bigger country than Belize? Belize has approximately about 500,000 people plus. Guatemala has 18 million. By what factor would Guatemala be bigger than Belize? That is to say, they can afford economically, population-wise, societal-wise, and in all aspects, landmass-wise, they're much bigger than Belize. So they can afford to field a much bigger and powerful army than Belize to play all kind of games with Belize, as they are currently doing right now at the Sarstoon, physically denying the Belizeans their rights to be or go to part of their country. Why? Because the Guatemalan military is forcing them or stopping them from doing so. Do you know why they have decided to lay claim to the not only the Sapodilo Islands, they're laying claim to the Sarstone Island because there's a lot of oil underneath that area. The company that came to Belize to drill for oil in that area of the Tamash Sarstone area can stay over on the Guatemalan side from where they came originally and drill what you call technically in the drilling industry, underground drilling industry, you have a technical operation that is called horizontal drilling. So they can sit from over the Guatemalan side of the border and do horizontal drilling and suck out as much oil and gas from Belize as they want without having to put their rigs vertically on Belizean land. I can speak to that issue because I dealt with that matter in terms of horizontal drilling on a multi-billion dollars project in Carlsbad, New Mexico, on behalf of the U.S. government, for which I was awarded a brass buckle, which the U.S. government does not do that kind of award to civilians too often. But I, a little Bacatong Belizean, was fortunate enough to be part of that project and successful enough to have brought that project in completed ahead of schedule and under budget, for which the U.S. government stamped the insignia of that facility in brass and gave to 13 of us. And I don't want you to feel, you who are listening to our program, I don't want you to feel like I'm bullcrapping, okay? So I'll just show it to you. This is what I'm talking about. Okay? That's the big brass buckle that I was talking about just now. What it says? WIPP, Waste Isolation Pilot Plant. A multi-billion dollars project in Carlsbad, New Mexico to store nuclear waste material underground. And as a nuclear engineer, I had the privilege to participate in that project, which most Belizeans are not afforded that type of opportunity. I happen to have been one of the lucky ones. Okay. So when I'm talking to you about some of these things, I'm not talking off the top of my head or talking through my ears. I'm speaking to matters that I know what I'm talking about, speaking about. Nevertheless, as regards to the horizontal drilling that I mentioned earlier, Guatemala doesn't have to fight Belize or strong arm Belize to steal Belizean property or the legacy of Belizean as a country, to suck out the oil from under Belize, or to gain access to the oil under Belize. They can do that without the Belizeans even know that that is happening, because in Belize, most people doesn't even know what horizontal drilling is, and or, some of them don't even know that we have oil and other minerals. We have gold. Well, of course, they do know that we have gold because they have seen the Guatemalans then pan for gold right on the surface. But we have major veins of gold. We have copper, we have zinc, and many other minerals. Our country has wealth untold. As you said in our anthem, national anthem. But our government is not trying to position the country in a situation where the people of the country, as the preamble stipulates, should be able to benefit from the assets of the government and the country. No. These rascals, they go and make all kind of agreement with foreign entities who give them a little something under the table, and then they compromise all governance powers and make laws to facilitate these people with 20, 30, 40, 50 years concessions to rape and pillage our assets, and we get nothing. For example, the BNE, Belize National Energy or Gas Company, that was set up recently, and has been exporting oil out of the country. We, the Belizean people, are not even getting 5% of the revenues from that stuff. When in fact we should have get, if not half, a little more than half. Because it belongs to us as a country. It not belongs to the foreign investors who come in and pay only more leader to any of government officials them and get a legal concession that compromise the whole country over a barrel to have our assets being exploited, and we derive very little from it. In fact, the little bit that we get back goes to some of the people under whose land these oil revenues are, these oil rigs are being put. It's pathetic. But as regards to the Belize Guatemalan issue, which is the focus of the last part of our program, and I think we have another 15 minutes to go, so I'll try and stick to the agenda in that regards. Guatemala declared its independence in 1821. By then, Spain still maintained the rights based on its papal bull Burgos decree to the landmass of Guatemala and the rest of Central America, because Spain did not recognize their independence until, I think it was 1863 or somewhere about, not too far away from 1860. It was either 63, 64, or 62, but I think it was 63. There's so many dates that I deal with in terms of these historical narratives and things that sometimes you're off by a few dates, or maybe sometimes you just don't remember certain things. But 40 odd years after Guatemala declared its independence, Spain acknowledged and acceded to let them have their independence. Prior to that, Guatemala had no authority or powers unto itself that Spain had granted or allowed for. Was it not for the Monroe Doctrine, Guatemala may not exist today as it currently exists. But it was the same Monroe Doctrine that caused the Guatemalans then to run for refuge to the British, to enter into alliances with the British to help them safeguard their own country. Yet many decades later, they're going to go back and say that the treaty that they signed is not valid because they say so. That's not how international law works. Once that treaty was signed and the British recorded it, there's no way that Guatemala could have on its own, as one of the parties, just arbitrarily and capriciously declared that treaty to be null and void and or to not honor it. And they refused to go to the ICJ for decades. Mr. Golson was always saying that the treaty should go to the ICJ for validation, because if the treaty goes to the ICJ for validation, Guatemala has no legs to stand on. So now that we're at the ICJ, they're trying to come up with other ideas, and they're trying to make other claims, and they're trying to pretend that, well, the agreement that they signed with our government recently, okay, the special agreement, according to them, that overrides the treaty and the boundary line. That is not true. That special agreement was only an incentive for Guatemala to go to the Hague. And it is Guatemala that instigated the going to the Hague issue. That is because they want to take a double bite at the apple, because they could care less what the Hague says. They have the United States as one of the permanent Security Council members on their side. So if God forbid that the International Court of Justice rules against Guatemala and in favor of Belize, Guatemala could just walk away and say they disagree with the ruling and they will not abide by it. And they have a good friend in the United States who sits at the Security Council and who can veto any such declaration or stop it from having the full weight and effect of the law. It wouldn't be the first or last time that has happened. The Japanese, they walk away. The Chinese, they walk away. Many other countries have walked away from the ICJ rulings that was contrary to their expectation or wishes. So Guatemala is only playing Passant. Because, as I just stipulated, if the ICJ rules against them, that is not the end of their game plan. They are fortifying their military to take military action against Belize. And who is going to stand on behalf of Belize to stop them from invading and or to kick them out if they ever invade? We had such a guarantee under the British, and we still maintain some level of a semblance of such a response through the Commonwealth status and the CARICOM status. But Belize can't count on the Organization of American States to come to its rescue, with the United States at the head to look after the interests of Belize, preferably than to look after the interests of Guatemala. The United States of America is a bigger and better friend to Guatemala than they will ever be to Belize. But the stupid Belizeans forget to remember that also the United States of America is a bigger and better friend to England than they would ever be to Guatemala. And it was entertaining the English influence on our foreign affairs that we had the basis on which Guatemala will never enter into Belize or try to militarily enter into Belize, while the head of state of Belize was the head of the British Commonwealth and Kingdom. Because America would not allow Guatemala to do that. But once we are distanced, as our leaders are trying to get us to do, away from the British, and away from the Americans, and away from any of the people that could come to our rescue, the Guatemalan army is going to eat our supper. Because that's what they have been preparing for decades. And if the court rules against them, like I said, it's nothing for them to just use their military powers and instigate some kind of military confrontation and then use that as a basis to say, well, they had to fight against Belize, and in fighting against Belize, the fact that they're a much bigger army and they conquer any part of Belize, that they should have the right to hold on to whatever they conquer because they gain it by military conquest. That's also part of international laws. That if you have a military confrontation and somebody conquer your place, you're at a disadvantage, especially if nobody's going to come to your rescue and kick them out. So Belize and Belizeans, please pay attention to what's going on. Stop falling asleep at the wheel. Do your own research. Do your own reading. analyze what's going on, learn what you need to learn that you didn't born knowing, because not knowing what you need to learn and not learning it could be the biggest travesty of your life and lifetime. Why? Your enemy predators are not looking after your well being and your interests. And we have them at the highest level of governance in our country. All they are worried about is the big ripoff, okay? What they can gain or get from the assets of the country, what they can gain and get from their association with foreign entities or powers, whether it be national or international organizations. All they are worried about is the big ripoff, okay? And you, the Belizean people, at 68% poverty rate, are constantly being put against the wall and in a precarious situation. I hope you stay engaged with this ICJ issue, because it's not going away quickly or easily. And more likely than not, Belize will walk away from this thing. It's not possible for us to walk away unscathed. And it is not likely that Guatemala will be allowed to walk away without some kind of benefits. So we will have to end up ceding something one way or another, whether we like it or not. The bottom line is that we are where we are. We shouldn't have been here. And all we have to do is press forward. We don't have control over the court or influence over the court, other than through the lawyers that are litigating these matters on our behalf. And our Prime Minister has already offended the main lawyer that was litigating on our behalf, throw the man under the bus and talk craziness that the man don't know the assignment, just because the man don't or give him the bastardized expected ruling that he wanted, or the recommendation that he wanted, that he had to turn around and offend this gentleman, and now we still have to depend on this gentleman to navigate on our behalf. That's another travesty unto itself. We should not have had to be in that situation either. But we are where we are. And I like to say, Belize and Belizeans, continue being a prayerful nation, continue being a hopeful nation, and it's going to be what it's going to be. We don't have much control. And the people who we put in position to help get the help that we needed, or the assistance that we needed, are letting us down big time. So all I could say is thank God for the privilege to have been here, to have been tasked with the rightful mantle as being the leader of the NIP faction of the UDP party, and having been given the privilege to have had to learn and study and know all the things that I've learned and studied and know, to the point where I can make this presentation in a lucid way without having even to read anything out of the textbooks or out of any of the many dozens and dozens of technical materials that I had to cover in terms of dealing with international law, dealing with anthropology, dealing with history, dealing with politics, and everything else that came as a byproduct of my being involved to this point. I thank you for your time, Spirit, and for listening to what I had to present tonight, babbling in your ears. To some of you, I may not be making any kind of sense, but to those who have spared and taken the time necessary to have learned enough to understand and contextualize what I'm speaking to on or about here tonight, more power to you. And I hope that you use your knowledge and skills to impart additional knowledge to the rest of our community. God bless Belize and Belizeans at home and abroad. Good night. And this is the end of the program for tonight, Friday, 28th of November, Belizean Affair Program number 368. Thank you. God bless Belize and Belizeans at home and abroad. Always. Good night.